Good morning and welcome to CAD Corp's webinar titled What is GIS and why do housing associations use it? Before we begin this morning, just a few notes. We will send you the recording afterwards, so if anything happens and you have to leave or you get cut off for whatever reason, do look out for that email that will come over to you a couple of hours after the webinar today. You'll have a link to the recording, which will also be available for you to send to your colleagues if anybody couldn't join us today. So you will have that. You'll see in the webinar interface, there's a questions panel. So do use the questions panel throughout the webinar today. It's a really good way for us to be able to interact with you and hear your thoughts on the subject. But at the end, we'll have some time to answer those questions as well. So do let us know if you have any questions, enter them in the questions panel, and we'll review those towards the end of the webinar and answer as many as we can. There'll also be a survey, so when the webinar finishes, this will pop up in your browser. I think it's 3 or 4 questions, so do complete those, and if you give us that feedback, it just gives us that opportunity to review the webinar and improve it for future webinars, and we've got a few planned in the near future as well. My name is Fergus Craig. I work here at CAD Corp. I look after our housing customers, so I look after our housing and our other commercial customers as well. I'm joined today by Ian Usher. Ian's going to be providing the demonstration today, and he's going to be using CAD Corp software to provide a live demonstration of some of the concepts using case studies and showing you how the applications actually work in this environment. So do hang around for that. I will be handing over to Ian in about 10 or 15 minutes. So CAD Corp are a software development company for those of you joining us today who don't know about CAD Corp. So we create the spatial information system that we call CAD Corp SIS. And CAD Corp SIS is a web, mobile and desktop mapping application. We work in lots of different sectors. We're obviously focusing on housing today, and we've got lots of customers in this sector who utilize CAD Corp technology, but we also work in lots of other sectors as well. Government, emergency services, we've got several insurance customers and infrastructure customers as well. And we focus on creating the spatial information system and providing that to our customers with implementation and training and other services that go alongside that. So the spatial information system, and I'll come on to a bit more detail about what this is and how it all fits together in just a few minutes, but just to give you a bit of an overview about the applications that CAD Corp provide. As I mentioned, the spatial information system is web, mobile, and a desktop mapping applications. So the web and the mobile provide an interactive and dynamic access to geographical data. And it's that web application that we're going to be focusing on today. So the web application can either be cloud hosted and managed by CAD Corp, or it can be installed locally on premise on your own infrastructure. So it's really flexible. It's the same application. It's just the back end is implemented in a slightly different way. And then we have a desktop application as well. We're not going to be showing or using this a lot today, but if you join us on some of our other webinars, you'll see the desktop application in a lot more detail. But the desktop is called CAD Corp SIS Desktop, and that's used for advanced data creation, editing, detailed analysis and visualization and reporting. So that's all done in CAD Corp SIS Desktop. But like I said, we're going to be looking particularly at web, CAD Corp SIS Web Map today. So within housing, we have lots of customers, and we work with all of these different organizations. Some just manage a few hundred properties, some manage tens of thousands, if not, I think a couple are even over 100,000 properties. So there's a real range of the size of housing organizations that we're working with. But it's interesting to see that regardless of the size, they all found the requirement to invest in CAD Corp technology. So So whether it's just a few hundred or tens of thousands of properties, I understand that all the challenges are very, very similar. So CAD Corp can offer a solution to lots of different size organizations. So that's always good to know. So to start the webinar today, the agenda, we're going to start with what is GIS anyway. So I'm going to start at the beginning and tell you what GIS is for those of you who aren't familiar. And then we're going to look at how GIS and web mapping can help your housing association. So we're going to go through a few different examples of how this type of technology can be of benefit to your organization. And then I'm going to hand over to my colleague, Ian, who's going to provide a live demonstration and use these different concepts to show you various use cases of how the technology is deployed at our housing association customers, so how they're actually using the technology. And then at the end, like I said, we'll have some time for questions. So do use that questions panel throughout, and we'll review those after the demonstration and answer as many as we can. So we're going to start with a poll today, and it's good to be interactive and make sure that everything's working for your end. So the first question, and we're going to have two questions, you should see that now. Does your organization currently benefit from GIS and or web mapping? It's really good to see what the audience is using, whether you're familiar with the type of technology we're talking about today or whether it's new to you. So do answer that question, and that's really good to see the results. So the results are still coming in. If you can't click on the poll, I think if you maximize the window, or then you should be able to click on it. There is a circumstance where it hasn't worked for a couple of customers recently, but lots of people are answering, so that's good. So we've got 65%. Oh, it's just changed. 67% have said yes, and 33% have said no. So that's really interesting. So about a third of the people today don't have a GIS or web mapping application in the organization, but many of you do, which is really good to see you attending today as well. Great, so thank you. I'm going to close that one, and then I'm going to launch our next poll, which you should see now. And this one is asking you, is your organization considering investing in GIS or web mapping? So the reason I'm really keen to ask this question is we've been running quite a few webinars over the last couple of months, and we realized that these webinars are actually forming part of a business case in many organizations to justify the investment in GIS and web mapping technology. So we're just really interested to see what the percentage of the organizations joining us today are looking at this, and it's really good to get that feedback. So the results are coming in. I think there's probably still a few more people to click, but we've got a lot of people who have answered the question, of course. Oh, there's still more results coming in. I'll give you a few more seconds. But yeah, a big majority of you said yes to that, that you are considering investing in GIS or web mapping. So that's great to see. That's obviously a great thing from our point of view. So we're really keen to continue the conversation with you after the webinar today, if that's the case. Great, I'm going to close that poll now. So thank you very much for answering those, and we'll move on. So like I said, we're going to start today by explaining what GIS is. And I appreciate that many of you, maybe 2/3 of the audience today, have GIS or web mapping already implemented in your organization. But for those of you who don't, or are very new to the technology, first of all, GIS stands for Geographical Information Systems. And a GIS is the way in which you can deal with geographical data. So I regard geographical data as any data that can be related to a point on the Earth's surface. So that could be an address for a housing association. It could be a property which has an address, which then you can get the coordinates. You know where that is on the Earth's surface. You know where that is over a map, effectively. You might just have a postcode, which is fine as well. You won't get such an accurate location, but we can still find roughly where that property is if you've got a postcode. You might already have coordinates, and there's lots of different types of coordinates you can use, but CAD-COPSys technology can read lots of different types of coordinates, so that's never really an issue if you've already got coordinates against your properties or your locations. And then there's lots of other geographical data out there as well. It's not just a particular point on a map. It's boundaries and areas, or we call them polygons, which could be a polygon showing flood extents or land titles, for example. So there's lots of different geographical information out there. And a GIS effectively gives you as an organization the capability to bring all of these different data sets together and visualize them and analyze them, report on them. You can edit and create them as well. So there's all these different things you can do with this geographical information, when you've got all these different elements. What GIS also enables you to do is connect to lots of different data sources externally as well. So anything you've got reference to that geographical location. So for a housing association, you might well have an asset management system and a housing management system, and maybe a CRM, maybe you've got a data warehouse and other systems out there as well. But all of that data at some point probably relates to a property or to a tenant, which is also related to a property. So all of that data can be connected to and brought into the GIS environment, enabling that analysis and reporting on that data. And we'll come on to why that's important in just a minute. But that's kind of the concept around geographical information systems, GIS. So one of the first things a housing association might do with GIS is simply understand the location of properties. And even if you might not have GIS or have a web mapping solution, you've probably loaded your properties into Google Maps or Bing Maps or something else. So you probably have a good idea about the distribution of your properties. But what GIS enables you to do is get them right down into individual address level and put points on a map, which is really important, because many of the considerations when managing these properties are dependent on how geographically located they are. If you imagine two housing associations, for example, one with a very densely populated portfolio of properties, and then one with very spread out property portfolio across, half the country, for example, or even the whole country in some cases, those two associations will have to be managed very differently, and the cost associated with managing those properties will be quite different as well. So looking at the geographical spread and the geographical location is really important about how those properties are managed. What's really key when you do get this very first stage of getting your properties on a map, as you can see here, is that you then start to understand how properties are located, and how some of them may be very close to one another, which you may not have realized looking at this data in a database or a spreadsheet driven system. For example, two properties could be really close to each other. They might be on different streets, in different postcodes, even in different local authority areas, but they might just be a few meters away from each other. So a GIS enables you to break down all those predefined boundaries that you may have in other systems and just focus on geography, which is absolutely key. So it's not just about points on maps, and we'll build on this a lot throughout the webinar today. But what we're seeing here is actually the point data, the property locations have been themed based on an attribute that's associated with those properties, which is coming from another system. So it doesn't matter what that attribute is. It might be when the properties have been void for over 3 months, or maybe the boilers are coming up for servicing, maybe there's a gas safety certificate due on them, maybe it's on sum of arrears or responsive repairs. All of this type of data, whatever it is, can be brought in, and you can visualize this geographically, which gives you so much more insight onto what's going on the ground. Just a note, on this screenshot, we have a really detailed mapping background here. So those of you who use GIS will be very familiar with it. This is Ordnance Survey Master Map topography data, which is each individual building outline. It shows you where the paths are and the roads are. We've got this available for the whole of Great Britain. It's really detailed mapping from the Ordnance Survey, and we're really lucky in this country to have access to this. So all of our housing customers use this level of detail, which is absolutely key when doing the types of things that we'll come on to in a second. So that's just worth pointing out as well. Many of our customers will look at the grounds maintenance responsibilities using a GIS, and quite often this is also the first step into GIS for an organisation, because there's a cost associated with managing the communal areas in an estate that's been adopted by the housing organisation or has been built by the housing association. So there's a responsibility there. And understanding the cost associated with that responsibility is absolutely key. And geographically speaking, if you can work out exactly what square meterage of grass needs to be cut, for example, or how many trees there are in an estate, then you can quantify that. It makes it much easier when going out to tender for your grounds maintenance contracts that you might do every 2 or every 5 years, or even if it's being managed internally by your colleagues. Just being able to understand how much work and how much effort is being required for each individual estate is absolutely important. Maybe you're thinking about redesigning the communal areas and you want to change it from grass to planted areas, and you want to understand the impact of cost. You can calculate all of these things within GIS. You can also then split that cost out to service charging of the properties who have access to those communal areas. So there's a lot of analysis you can do. We did a webinar specifically on grounds maintenance a couple of weeks ago. So if you want to look at this particular topic in more detail, do get in touch and I can send you the link to that webinar, which we did a couple of weeks ago. Land ownership is also obviously very important, and in recent years it's been really much easier to get access to HMLR, land registry title data, but not just title data of your properties, but you can also acquire the title information of other organisations as well, which is really beneficial. Going back to that grounds maintenance case, if you can see where the grounds maintenance is and you can see that maybe your organisation owns half of the properties in there, you can use this land registry data to find out who else owns the properties in that communal area. It won't tell you if a private individual owns the properties, but it'll tell you if an organisation, another housing association or a local authority or a private landlord owns properties in the area as well. And we have some of our customers who have looked at that data and then split the cost of maintaining that grounds with other landowners, other property owners in the area, and reducing the service charging for their tenants. So that's just one example. There's an assets and liabilities element to this. You can compare what titles the land registry hold against your organisation, comparing to the data that you're holding in your housing management system against these properties. We've got lots of examples where our housing customers have looked at this and found that they own land which they didn't know about, or that they have tenants in properties which they don't own according to the land registry. So both of those examples have got various outcomes depending on further investigation, but having a clear view of your land ownership is absolutely key. Also for development opportunities as well, you may find that you own a block of garages, for example, which are no longer being used, and that could be a potential residential development site. So there's lots of examples of how this land registry data can be really beneficial for a housing association to visualize and analyze within GIS. The sustainability of assets is like a stock performance score is often used within a housing association, but still it's being used in a database or a spreadsheet driven way and not in a geographical way. Whereas visualizing this type of data, which normally is a combination of lots of different factors to build up a stock performance score on each individual asset, and then being able to visualize this geographically and and combine scores geographically to aggregate them up into areas. We've got census areas here, but they could be postcodes or regions or estates, and then be able to have an overall view of what's going on the ground. And especially for senior management to have this view of performance. Maybe there's particular areas where there's a group of properties that aren't performing well. You can zoom in, you can see what's happening on the ground, you can make strategic decisions to put more effort and provide more resource to these areas to try and bring up those performance scores and increase the sustainability of those assets. So another really good use case of GIS and web mapping for a housing association. We've recently here at CAD Corp released the capability to integrate web mapping with Microsoft Power BI. Microsoft Power BI is a business intelligence application enabling you to visualize data in lots of different clever ways using graphs and charts and all sorts of different visualization techniques. And what we've provided the capability is to bring in mapping and the really detailed ordnance survey mapping that I talked about into this Power BI environment. But also what this integration enables you to do is any other geographical information that you might have access to in your web mapping or GIS tools, you can drop these into the background as well. So you can be analyzing your Power BI data via your pie charts and your graphs and also visualizing that geographically, and then being able to turn on and off other geographical data sets in the background to see how they impact, and then sharing these reports around the organization as well. So that's something new that CAD Corp released just a few months ago. And again, we did another webinar specifically on Power BI with lots of examples. So do let me know if you'd like to see that, and I can send you the link to see that in a lot more detail. In terms of integration, we also work with other application providers to integrate mapping and GIS technology in other applications as well. This is a screenshot of ActiveH, the housing management system by MIS, and this shows how CAD Corp's web map can be dropped into their environment. So when you're utilizing the housing management system, maybe you're drilling down and looking at particular details of a property, you can click the GIS tab and you can visualize that data geographically, but still within the housing management system environment. So we work with MIS to provide this to their customers, but also if you use another housing management system, then there's lots of different ways in which you can integrate the two systems together. CAD Corp technology has always been designed to be open and interoperable, so these other technology providers find it really easy just to drop in geographical elements into their applications. So do let us know if you want us to reach out to other technology providers and provide them with the instructions to drop in GIS into their environment, then that's something that we're really keen to do as well. So I'm going to hand over to my colleague Ian, who's going to provide the live demonstration part of the webinar today, and then we're going to come back to me after that and answer all of your questions. So do continue to use the questions panel throughout and throughout the demonstration, and then afterwards we'll come back and answer those. Great, over to you, Ian.
Thanks, Fergus. Okay, so what we're going to do in this demonstration is we're going to look at all of those examples that Fergus has just given you. So the first example we're going to look at is how we can use the web mapping to understand our properties better. So examples like being able to click on the particular asset and see all the information that's related to it. And that's the same for the sustainability of the assets, being able to see all that information in one place. We're then going to look at how we can kind of manage our land ownership, so being able to look at our land ownership as well as being able to create and maintain those particular areas. And then right at the end, what we're going to do is we're going to look at our integration, and in this particular case we're going to look at the integration that we get with the Power BI application. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to share my screen. Excellent, and so that looks all good to me. So it says it's showing my screen. So what you guys can see at the minute is our CAD Corp SIS web map, and this is a web mapping application that is designed to be really simple and intuitive for the end user, and it's designed to be able to let users visualize and query spatial information over the web. So what you see here is our first example where we've loaded up our application, and we've got all of our housing properties available to us right in front of us straight away. Because it's easy, what we can do is we can zoom in, and as we zoom in, what Fergus mentioned was that as we zoom in, we can see the Ordnance Survey master map data. So this is the most detailed mapping you'll get of the UK, and it provides things like house numbers, street names, garage plots, and things like that. So it's really detailed mapping that allows you to see more information about the properties and the location of the properties that you've got in question. What we can also do is we can provide alternative base mapping types. So one example that we've got set up is our aerophotography. So this allows us to see where those properties are in relation to a particular aerophotography overlay, so we can see how they all relate together, which is quite nice. But most of the mapping that we're going to be doing is going to be using our master map data. So one of the first things that you can do is you can use the web map to look for properties in question. So using the quick search, you might type a postcode and that'll give a list of particular addresses. But what I'm going to do is I'm going to type in a really unique reference number, and that system will go away and link to our housing asset management system and say, here is a housing association reference that I've got for you based on what you've typed in. So we've been really, really specific, and the system has told us that we've got this one available, and what I can do is click on it and it will locate us on the map to that appropriate place that we are looking at. So most of our the start of our demonstration is going to concentrate on this one property. So now that we've found that property, what we can do is we can interact with it. So if I were to left click on that property, we get a nice little summary box that tells us some really basic information to start with. So things like the address. So this is number 15 Trey Forest Road in Coventry, and we've got a particular housing reference, which is great, and that tied up with the quick search. But if a user clicks on show more, what they'll get is the remaining attributes that can be feeding from kind of our asset management system, your CRM, your tenant database, and all this data can be provided to the end user to give them a lot more information. So things like we've got the asset type, so we know that this one is a house. We've got the year built, so it's built in 1957. We've got the current arrears attached to that property. We've got our EPC ratings and our stock performances. And then we've got dates that might relate to our when our boiler is due to be repaired, or when we've got a gas safety certificate due as well. And it doesn't have to be textual, it can be links to images as well. So if we click on this image, it loads up an image of that particular property. We can click on a PDF, and what will happen is that the system could, in this example, it's loading up our short hold tenancy agreement. And then what we can also do is, using expressions in the desktop, is we can write links that take us away to our Street View data. So we're effectively being able to see where that property is using Google Street View before we go out on site. So we get a better understanding of that particular property and the properties that are also surrounding it as well. So that's how we can look at one property. But then, as Fergus has said, if you turn on lots and lots of different data at the same time, and you've got it all themed, you can start to recognize patterns in that data. So if I go into our map features, I'm going to say that I want to turn off my West Midlands housing data. And what I'm going to do is, I've got loads of property themes. So the first one I'm going to turn on is our arrears. So this allows us to identify patterns in the data that might be associated with our arrears. So for example, the bigger the circle, the more in arrears they are. So we've got a couple of houses towards this site that I'm circling, that we could maybe go and speak to the tenants and ask what the problem is with why they're in so much arrears. So this is things that make it more efficient for the housing association to do one visit rather than going 2 or 3 times, because we can see on a map that all those properties are all together. We could look at our EPC ratings. So this allows us to identify inefficient properties, which, you know, it might mean that you educate the tenants better on how they can more efficiently insulate the property, for example. And again, we can see patterns in the data where you might have 2 or 3 properties that are less efficient than others. So maybe, again, it's all about using the information provided to identify patterns in the data and being able to make your housing association more efficient. We can also use this data as a hotspot. So in this example, We've just got a simple hotspot that identifies where all of those properties are and the ones that are more efficient than others. So it just allows us to see that information in front of us. Every property is expected to hold a compliant gas safety certificate, and when you overlay this data on top of the property points, this becomes really informative, because we've got a theme attached that basically says the red points are the gas safety certificates that are out of date. So straight away, I can see in this estate we've got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 properties out of maybe 40 or 50 that are due a gas safety certificate. But what it also does is it allows us to see that there's gas safety certificates that are due within a month, within the next 3 months, and then within the next 6 months. So if we are going to visit a particular property because we know that that one needs a new gas safety certificate, then maybe again we say that we can visit 4 or 5 of the properties at the same time. So it's making it more efficient. The households are better equipped because they're all up to date with the gas safety certificates. And again, it's information that you'll see on a map that you won't necessarily spot within a CSV file. We've also got our individual performance ratings. So this takes into account 2 or 3 different attributes. So this is looking at kind of our responsive repairs, void time, and then our maintenance levels as well. So you'll see all of this information is split off, and we can see how that effectively looks for each individual property. But this allows us to see 3 or 4 different attributes at the same time via a pie chart. So that's a really informative way of getting data out there. And then finally, we've got our overall property rating. So based on all of this information, our arrears and our gas safety certificate due dates and the EPC ratings and the performance statistics, we can easily identify the performance of our overall stock. So we can easily see where we've got properties that are performing less than they should, and we've got properties that are performing better than they should be as well. So again, we can see that on a map, and it just makes the understanding of the data a lot more efficient for the end user. What we can do now is we can put ourselves in the tenant's position. And what I'm going to do as part of this property that we're looking at is going to say that we're a housing tenant and we've got a fault with our kitchen cabinets. So I want to be able to report that to the housing association. So if I go onto the what would you like, I'm going to say that I want to report a problem. And one of the problems that I want to report is a possible repair. And I'm going to do this by clicking on the map. So what I can do is I can click on the property in question, and I can click next. And the user then is required to enter some really basic information. So things like a valid email address. So I'm going to put mine in there. And then we can add additional comments. So I'm going to put kitchen units in need of repair. To back that up, we could add an image. We don't have to, but we can if we want to, just to make it easier for the housing association to see that this has been reported and this is the reason that I'm reporting it. So we're going to add that in there as well. And then finally, we can verify that we're human, and we can say submit. And what will happen with that is that it will get fed into a database. So that's recorded and said that this tenant or this house has now got a repair assigned to it for a kitchen unit. But what it'll also do is send an email to a user, which on this example could be the repairs team, who can see, if we go into map features, they can see that that's been reported, because when we click on it, we've got a nice big red exclamation mark that highlights that there's something been reported and attached to that property. We've added labels to this to make it easier, so we can see that this was reported at the 16th of the 6th at 20 to 12, which is great because that's the time we reported it. But we can also build in additional information. So when this has been reported, we've also added extra information that come from the gas certificate team to say that actually this house is due to have the certificate updated, and it's now out of date as of the 4th of November. So not only can the repairs team go out and look at the kitchen, but they might also notify the gas certificate team and say, actually, we're going out on site. If we go at the same time, there's less disturbance for the tenant associated with that property. So again, it's all about making it more efficient for the housing association and the tenant that you've got within that site as well. So that's looking at all this data based on an individual property. But as Fergus has said, what we can also do is look at our overall stock performance. So we can see all of our stock performance for the area that we've got in question. But as we zoom out, what I can see is that we can then say that maybe we want to analyze our stock performance based on a super output area level or a lower district level. And then as we zoom out a bit more, maybe we've got a district level that we can go to as well. So this is analysing all that data that sits underneath and gives an overall view of the stock performance within the area that we're dealing with. So in this example, we can see we've got an average stock performance that's pretty low at the north of the district. So if I then start to zoom in, we can see we've got our output areas, and we can see that there's a couple of red areas. So if I go this way again, what you'll start to see is that then it will highlight the properties. So I can see there's two properties in this particular polygon that we were looking at, and they've got low ratings. So maybe as part of our senior management team, we look at the strategic decision to concentrate on these two properties, or we could dispose of the two properties if we feel that we're not doing a good enough job, or they're not connected to further properties in that area. So it gives us the overall stock performance, gives us a better understanding of all of our assets, rather than concentrating on an individual one. What we can also do is look at our land ownership. So if I turn on my West Midlands housing properties, what we can say is that we want to look at our land ownership data. So these are my housing association land polygons, and they show us which boundaries as a housing association we own. So these are identifying the properties that we are generating income on, but we might not actually own the land that's associated with that property. So in this example, there's two properties to the northeast of that area where we own those properties, but we don't appear to own the land. And this is only something that you'd see within a GIS environment, because you can see that the polygon doesn't match the point that is underneath it. And likewise to the southeast of the site as well, there's bits where we technically own the land, but we don't actually generate any income from the property on them as well. So it's making it easy for us to understand the patterns in the data, so we can see all that land registry data. And then what we can also do is turn on our commercial corporate ownership data as well. So this identifies not only the land that we own, but also you could have other housing associations that own the land too. So this just backs up and provides evidence for the fact that, you know, we own and we generate income from these two properties, but there's another housing association or land owner that is owning the land that is associated with those properties. So now we can see that, you know, actually we can work with someone to say, well, actually maybe we should share the maintenance of these properties and the land that's associated with it, or again maybe we could look at disposing it. What it can also do, as Fergus mentioned in his presentation, is that I know in this site we own this stretch of land in the middle, but I know that's green space. So again, it's just, we could identify that as potential development opportunity as well. So it gives us lots and lots of options and flexibility to look at how we can look at the properties that are in question and the land around it. And like I say, it's not something you'd get from a tabular data set. It's something that you'd see in a GIS environment that makes it all a lot easier to understand from an end user point of view. Because we are looking, or we were talking about disposing of land, what a user can do is they're able to annotate the map and print a map out. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to put my associated lands on, which is our green maintenance, our grounds maintenance, and our tree canopies. And what I'm going to say is that maybe we want to draw on our properties the land that we're going to dispose of, the properties that we're going to dispose of. So I'm going to make this red outline with a clear fill. And what you can see me do is, as I draw the areas, which is snapping to our master map data, we're going to draw on this area. I'm going to double click to finish, and then what I can do is add some text in there as well. So I'm going to say let's put potential disposal, and we can make that text bigger and smaller as we see fit. So I'm just going to drop that in the back. In order to print this off, I don't want the master map. Maybe I just want the old style landline data, which just gives us a lot less of coloured polygons. So maybe we just want to identify the street outlines and the building outlines easier in this example. So we're going to leave it as that. And then what we can look at is we can look at printing this data. So if I click on print, it takes us to a print page. What we can do is we can change the title. So I think this was High Street Coventry. It wasn't High Street, it was Trade Forest, but I'll stick with High Street. We can change the name of this. So rather than me as being an admin user, I'm going to say that this is my print. And then we've got different options. So we can change the paper size. So I'm going to leave it as A4. We can change the orientation. And in this example, I might change it to our landscape so we can get more data in. We can add a legend in there that allows us to see that why we've got red dots and what the grounds maintenance types and the tree canopies mean. But what we can then do is we can either send that data to a printer, or if we enter a scale, so I'm going to print this off at 1:750, and I'm going to print this as a PDF. And what it will do is it will generate us that PDF. And once it's done, we can say that we want to download that data. It puts it into a PDF file, which we can see in front of us. And what we can then do is we can then pass this to the relevant people to say that this is, this is a potential disposal site. Obviously, you can put your own templates in here. So you'd have maybe a north point and a scale bar and things like that. We're just using the standard CAD Corp web ones at the minute. But if you use it as a PDF document, if we just download this, and I'm going to say we'll stick with High Street. What we can do once we've printed this off is we can open this in Adobe, and we can make this is an interactive PDF, so we can turn the sites on and off. So if I say I want to open with Adobe Acrobat Reader, what you'll see, the reason I've turned that data on is that we can turn all this data on and off. So maybe for an interactive print, we can turn our West Midlands housing off, or maybe the association of land that we've got, maybe we turn our greens maintenance off and our tree canopies and just leave our West Midlands housing data on. So it gives us a lot of flexibility in not only printing the data off, but then giving the user everything that they want, so that the user can then look at individual data sets that they can then turn on and off to view individual information around the properties that we're looking at. So it's a really good way of users analysing data using a PDF instead. What we can also look at is we can also look at editing data through the web. So we've got our grounds maintenance switched on at the minute. So I'm just going to turn this back to our standard master map. And what I'm going to do is on our map features, I'm just going to turn off our West Midlands housing, and then I want to turn off our tree canopies as well. So we want to create some new grounds maintenance. It's really simple for us to do that. What we can do is we can say that we want to edit a data set, and there might be multiple different data sets that as an administrator you want users to be able to access. So in this example, we're going to say our grounds maintenance team have got access to edit the grounds maintenance data, and what they're going to do is they're going to draw a polygon, and to make it accurate, we're going to enable snapping on this data set, on our master map data. So what will happen is, as I click, you'll see that as we're drawing, it's snapping to the master map, which ensures that it's accurate. And you'll see why we need it to be accurate in a second, because when we've finished, we'll get some pre-built expressions that allow us to see how much this grounds maintenance cost. So we double click to finish, and then what we can do is we can edit the attributes that would normally be filled in with the grounds maintenance. So we might have a drop-down list that allows us to pick paths or maintained roads. I know in this example that we're saying that this is a piece of grass. The cut frequency can be manually typed in, so I'm going to say this is 6 months. And we might have a grounds maintenance reference, so I might just enter this manually as well. And then the site area and the maintenance cost, I'm going to leave blank, because these are expressions that have been worked out to work out the overall maintenance cost of that particular grass that we've got in question. So when I click save, the system tells me that feature has been updated successfully. And what you'll see is not only is it put that polygon in place, it's also coloured it appropriately for the theme that we've got applied, but it's also put a label on it to say that this piece of grounds maintenance is going to cost £348.67 per square metre. And that's really good, because that can be used across the whole housing area, so we can work out what the grounds maintenance cost is for all of these properties in this particular area. And if I were to just select that and just say we want to edit the attributes, what you'll see is that we didn't fill the site area and the maintenance cost in, but those boxes have been pre-populated with the calculations from the desktop. So it's a really good, simple way of editing spatial data over the web for things like grounds maintenance in order to get accurate calculations. The final thing that we want to show is that the CAD Copsys web map has an option to be embedded into other applications. So as Fergus said, there was a housing management system that had got an embedded map in there. But one of the examples that we can show is the integration with the Power BI application. So this is a reporting and dashboard application that analyzes the data with dynamic links to spatial information and creates them as kind of pie charts and gauge charts, and you've got tables that sit in there as well. But the important bit is that you've also got the option of now adding a map into there that is coming from your corporate mapping data, so people are familiar with it. You don't need to translate coordinates. You don't need to translate the position of the housing property in order to get it in here. You can just take the position that it's in. And more importantly, it's coming from the same set of data. So we know that all these properties are the ones that we own within the particular area that we've been looking at today. And to show that it's dynamic, what we can do is I might say that I'm interested in my housing area, which is our Stoke Aldermore. So when I click it, what you'll see is that all the pie charts and bar charts and the current arrears cost, they all change, which is fantastic, because then it gives us a breakdown of how our overall stock performance is for this particular area and what the current arrears are, and the table provides the number of properties and the overall stock performance as well. But then we can break it down further. So in our count of asset types, I might click on our bungalow chunk of the pie, and when I click on bungalow, the map changes again. But what we also see is that the current arrears goes down. So now we're able to get really specific and say, well, how much does the bungalows within Stoke Aldermore cost, or how much arrears are they currently in? So we can identify that, and we can see that there's 42 properties in there as well. So it's a really good way of analysing your housing data in a dashboard and reporting environment really easily. We're optimizing the mapping environment for your corporate mapping system that you've got available as well. So that kind of sums up everything that we've done today. So we've looked at how we can use our web mapping to look at our individual properties and look at stock performance of our overall assets. We've also looked at how we can create and maintain grounds maintenance and land ownership data. And then finally, we've looked at our Power BI reports and how we can use dashboards and reporting to enhance the data that we've got available within our housing management system. So what I'll do now is I will pass you back over to Fergus to finish off the PowerPoint.
Excellent, thank you, Ian. So Ian provided so many different examples and so many different ways in which a housing association can use web mapping. So there's a lot of content in there. But some of the key takeaways is that we really believe that housing is a location-based industry. All of your data, or maybe not all of your data, but the vast majority of your data is related to properties or to tenants, which are can be related to a geographical location on a map, and utilizing all these different ways to visualize and analyze the data is absolutely key in providing that contextual information to aid the decision-making process and help you as an organization make better and more cost-effective decisions. And GIS enables understanding of what is happening where, essentially. So that's absolutely important. Do get in touch with us. You can continue the conversation today. Do let us know. The survey will pop up at the end of the webinar. There's one of the options there is if you want to continue the conversation today, then myself, one of my colleagues will call back. You can contact me or your CAD Corp account manager using the details there. So do get in touch if you want to know more. If you are a housing organisation, for example, and you are considering investing in GIS and you want more of your colleagues in the organisation to know how it can benefit you, then we'd be really pleased to organise an online demonstration of your own properties and the types of things that are important to your organisation. So do get in touch, and we'd be very pleased to organise that for you. do also look out for us. There's loads about us in the press recently. Just this month's Housing Technology magazine, there's an article about what is GIS and why use it, which was a summary of a presentation that I and Steve Litchfield from Orbit presented at the Housing Technology Conference at the beginning of the year. So do look out for that. I think we'll send you a link to that as a follow-up when we send you the link to the webinar later on today as well. And yeah, let's have a look at some of these questions that you've been asking. So I can see a few here. One is, do I need to pay for the map data? Okay, a really good question. So it's not straightforward to answer actually. The map data, so as I described, that Ordnance Survey master map topography data, that really detailed building outline data, it depends what type of organization you are, but let's assume you're a housing organization, you're a housing association, a registered social landlord, you're not part of local authority, so you're not an arm's length management organization, you're an independent housing association, then yes, there is a map data license for that really detailed map data. But what we do, we work with you and we can organise via an Ordnance Survey licensed partner to cut out just the bits of that really detailed map data that you need to display the map data around your properties or around your development sites. So you're not paying for map data that you're not going to use. And then there's slightly less detailed data which is free to license. So that can be used to provide coverage for lots of other areas as well. So yeah, there is a license fee depending on what type of organisation you are, but do get in contact with us. We can work with you to minimise that and get the appropriate data for your use case. So another question, is there a free version? Yeah, there is. So there's CAD Corp Sys Desktop Express is a free desktop GIS application which you can download from the CAD Corp website. You can't do all of the things we showed you today, but you can visualize data. You can see your data in there. So do give that a go, or get in touch if you need any help with that. Another question, are you on G Cloud? Yes, so G Cloud is the digital marketplace for it's designed for government organizations, and it's like a pre-tendered list of cloud-based software suppliers effectively that you don't need to go through a big tender process and everything else to procure technology through, and housing associations are included in that as well. So we've supplied a few housing associations recently actually using the G Cloud framework. So it enables you as an organization to search on that digital marketplace, search for the type of technology you're looking for. You'll get some results. You'll see CAD Corp on there. You can look at the pricing. All of the pricing's on there, and all of the information about the service we can provide is on there. And it's a really quick and easy way to invest in cloud-based technology. So yeah, you will find us in there, and there's different services on there as well which you can have a look through. So do have a look. Let's see, are there any more questions? Yeah, there's one about grounds maintenance data. How do I create grounds maintenance data? Like I mentioned, we did do another webinar specifically about grounds maintenance. So I'll send you the link to that after the webinar. But essentially, you can create the grounds maintenance data yourself. CAD Corp Sys Desktop is the best application to use for that. We didn't show that today, but that's a desktop GIS which has loads of data capture tools in there, and lots of different ways in which you can create data really easily and really quickly. So we can train you and help you kind of design the way in which you do that, so you can be really efficient and capture that data yourself. Alternatively, many of our customers decide to work with a third-party data capture company, and because CAD Corp Sys Desktop is really good and efficient at capturing data, there's a few organizations, several organizations out there, data capture organizations actually use CAD Corp Sys Desktop technology. One we're working with just now is CA Design. They're working on a project with us just now for a housing association customer, so they might be good to contact. Okay, I'll just answer one more question, which is about blocks of flats, which is a good question. How do you see the data if it's in a block of flats? Yeah, so so you saw in demonstration, you saw points or symbols representing properties, and obviously if it's a block of flats, then you might get symbols stacked on top of each other, and that might mean that you can't see the ones underneath so easily. So we have some tools available it's called disperse points effectively, and what it does, it disperses those symbols or those points either inside the building itself or around the building, so you can spread them out and you can see that data much more clearly in the scenario where you've got a block of flats. So yeah, there's a few other ways in which you can deal with that data as well, but that's the most common way to deal with it. Okay, I think we've answered all of the questions, and that concludes today's webinar. Do join us for future webinars, and do answer the survey questions, which will pop up when we end the webinar in just a second. Thanks for joining us today.